Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm here with Dan Drake, and we're here with Allan Katz, and we are recording live from the ITAP Symposium, and we have a series of interviews that we're doing with authors that have published books recently that are available here for the therapeutic community, but also for people who are in their own recovery. So, Allan, welcome.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you being here.
Welcome, Allan. It's nice to have you.
Thank you.
So, before we were talking about how you got into this line of work. I thought it was interesting. Would you share just like your story of becoming a CSAT?
Sure. Well, I was a marketing consultant, and I had a direct mail advertising and printing business for about 20 years. And I was constantly comparing myself to other people, going to seminars and buying all kinds of stuff to figure out how I could, become a millionaire or something. And I realized that it was just everything you went to, they wanted you to spend more money to come up to another elevated level, and then you were going to learn the secret of how to be rich, So I was telling all this to my therapist, and she said, well, you really could be a good therapist, and I think you should become a therapist. And I said, well, I'm 58 years old. I can't go back to school now and get a master's degree. It's ridiculous. And she said, well, you're going to be 60 anyway. You might as well go ahead. So that's what she said. That's what I did. I went back to school, and she forgot to tell me this little fact that I had to work another 2 years under supervision to get my license.
No, that was the thing.
Not detail. But anyway, it was wonderful, and the people that I did work under supervision, I ended up working for them anyway. So I worked 6 years in an alcohol and drug treatment center, doing groups and individual. I got some psychodrama training, and then I became a certified sex addiction therapist. So as I was working at the treatment center, I was building up my private practice. And so now I'm solely in private practice for about 5 years.
I'd love to hear more. So you're here, you have a new book. Love to hear more about your book and how that came to be. Can you tell us about what the title of the book is and how it came about?
Sure. The title of the book is Navigating the Phases of Sex Addiction Recovery. And it's a book about adding meaningful value to your sobriety. Meaning, value, and purpose to your sobriety.
So, tell me more when you say adding meaningful value and purpose to your sobriety. Is this for people who are just getting sober? Is this for people who've been sober for a little bit? What's the book? Who would find this book most helpful?
So people that have some sobriety on their belt. So it's kind of like for the person who says, okay, I've been sober, I got this, what do I do now? What am I supposed to work on for myself now? And so I have like this VIP program called For Values, Integrity, and Purpose. So because I realized that until I have a purpose, until I'm doing something of value and have a purpose in my life, I'm not going to feel fulfilled, and I'm not going to necessarily be happy. And so that's what the book is. It's a workbook to help people work on some of those things, on how to find value and purpose in their life.
Which I think that's amazing, because a lot of my clients, their target is sobriety. They think this is, and we often differentiate sobriety versus recovery, but it feels like these are, okay, now what? So sobriety is huge. That's a big deal. We got sobriety, but now what are we doing? What are we looking for?
Right. It's kind of like the drive drunk, where when a person was drunk, they would scream and yell and, a whole different personality. So now that they're not drinking and they're still acting that way, that's what a drive drunk. So the same thing here with sex addiction. They could be sober, but if they're not treating their wife or partner nicely, or they're still, kind of lying or, skimming around the edges of what's okay and what's not, So they still need some help to move forward with that.
It reminds me, like we were talking beforehand about the steps. And, step 4 is identifying your character defects and then letting them go and turning them over. And it sounds like in your book, you're taking not just the letting go of your character defects, but what do we replace them with?
Exactly, right. So I've always thought about that, like, we're told to let go of our negative character defects, but like, what am I supposed to replace them with? What am I supposed to do? Right? It's hard enough to find out what my negative defects are, right? So, do I want to be a person of integrity? Do I want to, just be an honest person? And what do I want to try to achieve in life?
And this may be too, I'm just thinking of a complicated question, so we can simplify it. I was thinking if someone from start to finish, so someone comes in, they start to read your workbook, they start to work on it, where do you imagine they're starting at, and where do they, ideally end when they've kind of finished going through the work of the workbook?
Okay, so the workbook is divided up into 4 parts. And the 4 parts are what are the 4 distractions that stop people from getting to their purpose or to a life of value.
Yeah.
And that is, the things that are distracting us are technology, work, not having a work-life balance. Technology, I don't have to explain that. Right?
Wait, it's a distraction? A barrier?
And then other people that we don't know how to really engage with other people that annoy us, we don't know how to deal with it. That kind of distracts us, right? Because we build resentments, and then that's our reason for acting out a lot of times.
Yeah, often our kryptonite.
Yeah. And then feelings, like, most men especially have a trouble really expressing their feelings. And so it goes through, we go through a feelings inventory in the workbook, and then getting them to really, figure out what the feelings are. And then we take 2 differing character traits that kind of are opposites, and then show them the differences. So if I can just look into
Please, actually show us the cover of the book so that people can see what they're looking for.
So it's called Navigating the Phases of Sex Addiction Recovery. And so in the top, it has integrity, respect, ethics, and values.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good clip art that we found for him. So there's a part in here, spirituality, replacing character defects, indifference, generosity versus deprivation, diligence versus laziness, sobriety and serenity. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Oh, so you kind of, if there's the character defect on one side, you're like, okay, what is the flip side? What is the positive trait you want to literally replace it with? Absolutely. Exactly. That's great. Right.
Yeah, so it's not just the change by elimination, it's the change by, okay, we're leaning away from this, but what are we leaning into? What does that look like? And I assume in there's also some exploration about, and what would it look like? What kind of actions can you take, or what kind of changes in your thought in your own individual process?
Right.
What might that look and feel like as you're leaning into this new character of integrity that you're looking for?
So there's exercises all the way through this. Like this one is called Reclaiming the Self. Who do I want the world to see me as? I'm just looking through these. How can I connect better to others? What's the hardest lesson you've learned? Just questions that people don't even think about. It makes them go back in their memory and really think about who they are, and then what type of person do they want to be, and it helps them get there.
Yeah, I was thinking, if we talk about sex addiction as an intimacy disorder, and it feels you're addressing issues of barriers with relationships and connection with other people, and then feelings that could, obviously those are intertwined, and it can be can be difficult for people and their own pain or trauma that they've experienced. So it sounds like you're trying to address some of those pieces of the intimacy disorder as well. And how do people become the best versions of themselves, maybe the versions that they may have been at their core that's never been realized based on.
Right, because if I'm not vulnerable, especially to my spouse, then I'm not going to be much of a help to her or him or anybody. If I don't really know how to be vulnerable enough to be honest and
I don't know if you say I even back up. It sounds like what you're doing. If I'm not vulnerable with myself, if there's some self, I don't even know who I am. So you're trying to explore a little bit more of who I am as a person and get to know some of those things that maybe have been shut off for a long time.
But I'm trying to get people in my practice. I'm trying to get people away from this idea of can't act out. I can't act. We had a rabbi once that came to our congregation and spoke, a scholar in residence, and he said this amazing thing called it's I can't versus I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, instead of saying I can't act out, I can't act, it's like that negative which builds up a lot of pressure. Instead saying I don't do this anymore. That's not who I am. I'm not that type of person anymore. And so if I get triggered or I get a craving, if I could say that to myself, that might help me avoid that.
Really powerful. I remember in my own therapy, my therapist at one point, sort of early on, saying, well, do you want to keep acting out? And I was like, no, just like, well, you can if you want to. You don't have to stop. And it was not her saying, keep going with your addiction, but it was very much her saying, this is a choice. And are you going to make a choice? And what I love is that oftentimes, I think addicts, and this is incorrect on their part, but addicts sometimes see the choice as either I do this or I do nothing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I do this or I don't do this. Mm-hmm. And what you're really leaning into is that, the recovery principle, which, like you said, it's moving beyond being the dry drunk. It's not just I don't. What's the choice is I could do this, or I can lean into recovery. I can lean into integrity. I can lean into my values. I can lean into intimacy. I can lean into what is it like to lean in and choose integrity. Mm-hmm. And you're really just laying that out and helping them to sort of clarify what does it look like to embrace those type of character assets.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious. I was just thinking, as one of those big pieces, feelings, especially if we're talking about men, male addicts. That's a big topic of how do we, understand, like identify feelings, how to work through those. Anything how have you kind of broken it down? How do you tackle that particular area?
I have a thing called the feelings inventory, which is it's a bunch of just statements that you have to finish. And so when I think of dad, I think of blank. When I think of mom, I think of blank. What I like about myself is, what I don't like about myself is, those kind of questions, so open-ended questions of the self, basically. And it helps them really find themselves and also just, explore their feelings. When I think of the color red, I think of blank. And there's so many people, like some people will say heart, some people say love, some people will say blood,
that's interesting.
So you can really get into their head, like what this person, it's kind of like art therapy almost, right? It's just like
it projects all that emotional wounding that they may not be aware of and gives them a way to bring it to the surface. Like, I can finally deal with this. It can be on the table.
Yeah.
We can see it.
Yeah.
We specifically treat sexual addiction. Now, I wonder how sexuality and sexual behaviors and sort of moving away from addictive sexuality to healthy sexuality, does that sort of come into your book at all?
Well, one of the things that I speak about in the book is how do I how do I build that emotional connection with my partner?
Mhm.
And I found so many times that when we think about sex addiction, we think about what am I doing outside of the relationship? But there's a lot of people who within the relationship, like we've heard from some of the keynotes,
Yeah.
within the relationship, if I'm pressuring, if sex is good now, let's do it again, let's do it tomorrow, let's that kind of thing, where I'm pushing, not physically, but I'm pushing my partner to everything. If your partner is telling you all you think about is sex, you probably have a problem, because that's all. Like I'm making sexual innuendos and everything is joking around about it, and so how do I try to help them? How do I fix that so that my partner can feel safe? Because when we're doing that, when we're pushing too much, our partners don't feel safe.
Mhm.
And then, we that's where that's where the addiction comes out in the home life also.
And you address that, so you do address that specifically.
Yeah.
What makes, there's different workbooks out there. What makes yours, what's unique about what you're doing in this space with your workbook that is addressed in others?
Good question. I like to tell you how it came about. Maybe that'll
Please.
Okay. So we have a Passover Seder every year, and my son comes up with a theme every year. So one year he comes up with a theme of freedom, and so each family unit, my son, my daughter, me, some of the other relatives, they have to come up with a presentation. And so I had to think of what am I going to present? And so I thought about what are the things that block our freedom in life today? And so that's where I came up with the 4 things. Was technology, work.
Yeah.
Because I used to sit outside in my backyard and I had to be reading or listening to something or studying or something. I couldn't just be with myself. And that's such an important thing, even with in recovery, just in life in itself, just to be, just observe what's going on out there. And so I brought these 4 things together into a book, and then made it into a workbook. So it's a lot of my own personal feelings about this idea of I don't know that anyone's really addressed that idea of how to replace 6 and 7. What do I replace those character traits with? And really getting into some of the ethical, moral types of things that we can replace it with.
Well,
I think that's why it's unique.
That's the uniqueness that I hear. I mean, there's a lot of books about what do we not do and how do we avoid it. And there are also books that lean into recovery principles. And here are the recovery principles that are what we do. What I really hear your book identifying is a combination of those 2. Hey, here are the things that get in the way of our recovery. Here are the things that get in the way of the life change. Because I'm very fond of saying, sobriety is necessary, but it's not sufficient. If you want your life to change, you have to get sober, and then you have to do the recovery work. And so your book is identifying, hey, here's the things that get in the way of your life change. And here are the things that we can lean into and replace them with that will facilitate that growth and that change that you're looking for.
Right. Because if I'm still feeling, negative about myself, but I'm sober, then I'm not gonna, until I find something that's gonna give me meaning or purpose to do, then I'm not gonna feel satisfied or happy.
When just the theme of freedom, that's the inspiring principle. That I think that's pretty. I love that. It just feels, as you're saying, okay, I get that. There's something that guides it. That's freedom, and I think that comes finding who I am. How do I become the best, most fulfilled version of myself that that radiates outward to everyone I'm interacting with.
But because in the world, people think if freedom means I can do whatever I want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm free, but really when you start doing that, that negative voice is controlling you.
Yeah.
You know, you start doing things you regret.
There's this concept that I think it's so important to our recovery, and I think it's important, in community and in life in general. It's like freedom to do what I want doesn't mean freedom to impact other people in any way that I want to. There's a responsibility that comes along with freedom. And what I hear with your book is like that leaning into what gets in the way of freedom, and then what do I replace that with, which isn't whatever I want to do. It's the freedom to sort of embrace things in a respectful way for myself and for the people around me, which is really where the joys of that kind of freedom come from.
And the analogy that I use is like if I'm driving down the street and I have freedom to cross, go through the intersection because, I don't have to, there's no rules, I can just go through, then I'm going to start affecting people. I'm going to wreck, affect myself,
Yeah.
Well, and I think of kids. No adolescent wants rules and restrictions, and yet if they're not given them, that there's no security there either. I think it's just freedom comes in knowing where the limits are as well, and where I can actually have, be the fullest expression of myself within these things. Like, we obey speed limits and we obey, traffic rules to protect ourselves and other people. And that's a good thing. And there's freedom in there, but it's, yeah, I think that's great. Beautiful.
If there were no rules, society would just be chaos.
Yeah. And your book helps people to sort of recognize, well, what are the rules that I am choosing to live by? In some ways, it's like, what are the values that I'm going to start bringing into my life in recovery?
Correct.
That's wonderful.
Who's the most, again, probably not an easy question, ideal person who would, it's like this book is for you?
So it's for the person that has, I'm not going to say how many months or years or anything, but just feels like, I'm still working my program. I'm sober, but I don't know where to go from here. I don't know who I am. Even though, okay, now I'm sober, right? And now that I'm sober, all these feelings and emotions are coming up that I've been hiding for so long. And I need to know how to deal with those things. I need to know who I am and what I can do to be able to live a healthy life, through that.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Makes sense. I love it.
Thank you so much. You know what? I'm going to throw a curveball in here. I am really appreciative of ITAP giving us space here at the symposium. And so if you're okay with that, I just ask, what's your favorite ITAP memory or what's your favorite ITAP experience? Let's just talk about our appreciation of ITAP for just a second.
Sounds good.
You got one?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story.
Let's hear it.
So I did all my trainings in Chicago.
Uh-huh.
And also someone just the other day was asking me about should they become a CSAT or should they do something. Somebody said it's very expensive. And I said, well, let me tell you, it's all online now. So I said, when I went to Chicago, I had to pay transportation to Chicago. I had to pay hotel fares. It was double the price. So, don't complain. But anyway, one of the trainings, I won't mention his name. Yeah, so he was here when we were all rooming together. Three Memphians were kind of rooming together, and we decided one night to go out, and they wanted to smoke cigars. So my dad smoked cigars his whole life, and so I thought, I just won't inhale, and I'll
Oh no.
So
I see where this is headed.
I tried not to inhale. So we went outside by the pool. I tried not to inhale, but obviously I did. And then I ended up in the bathroom like throwing up all night. So that doesn't have to do with that. That just has to do with the training. But
Was that one of the modules?
it was one of the modules, yeah. But I was trained by Patrick Carnes and Rob Weiss and all those people. So
I will just say, I appreciate those. I think, of course, the quality of the training is unparalleled. I would say, for me, what's been one of the most beneficial things is the community that's involved. I mean, in addition to the training and all the resources, is, I met Tim at one of our modules. So
Yeah,
we went whenever that was,
forever ago, day one of module one.
So I think this community, there's so many amazing people who do this work. That's what I love, and being part of this where we're all together is amazing.
I think the thing that I'm really appreciating these days, and it's partly because of my work with the American Foundation for Addiction Research, is how much advocacy ITAP has done for sex addiction, and more recently over the last 10 years, betrayal trauma and people who are impacted by this, and helping us to more effectively be able to identify who's struggling with sex addiction and who's not, and clarifying really what effective treatment is, not just because we feel like it, but because we have some evidence that it really works. And that organization that is willing to sort of put that kind of advocacy out to make that kind of life change for people, I just really appreciate it. Yeah.
Alan, where can we find you, and where can we find your book?
Absolutely. Sure. So my book was published by Routledge, and so you can go to Routledge. A lot of times they'll have a 20% off sale, but they have free shipping. Or you can go to my website, allanjkatz.com. It's ALLANJKATZ. My mother had to be different. Most people have ALAN. Anyway, you can go to my website and order it there, or Routledge, or Amazon, wherever you like, Barnes and Noble.
Great.
Perfect. And there's other things there too, which you might find interesting, resources, and I have a lot of articles on my blog, just about different parts of sex addiction, things like that.
And you've got a private practice in Memphis, so are you able to take clients, or
Yeah, I'm taking clients.
Great. And the book again is Navigating the Phases of Sex Addiction Recovery.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And I have an associate, a woman who has about 20. She's also a CSAT. She has about 22 years of experience. Her name is Karen Brown, and she works with me. And so sometimes I'll take the husband, she'll take the partner. We do groups together.
Yeah.
We do a men's group together on Monday nights. And we do. She does a women's group on Tuesday night. And so it's an amazing thing.
You're a full service stop. Nice. Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.